My name is Chase Iron Eyes. I was born in the Black Hills of what is called South Dakota on United States maps. And I was raised on the Standing Rock Nation, sometimes called the Standing Rock Reservation, which is not our name for these places. But I now am living on the land of my father, which is the Pine Ridge Reservation, still in what is now known as South Dakota. And I am now a father, a husband, and attorney working for the traditional leadership of our nation, the Lakota Nation, the Sioux Nation, the Ocheti Shakowi, in a forward movement to bring our people back to a state of stability, back to a state of flourishing. As you very well know, we are occupied by the United States, and there are ancient, outdated legal and economic oppression that plague our daily lives. So we are on a long journey to reclaiming our dignity. And this is everything I do is related to that overall vision. And I'm very happy to announce that I have been to Italy a number of two times. Me and my family, me and my son, and me and my wife, flying into Firenze or Florence, Bologna, spending time in Cervia, in Tuscany, Venice, and seeing what we can. And we are carrying on the tradition of Sitting Bull and Black Elk, who have also made the journey to Italia in order to make relations and strengthen our friendship and our knowledge sharing as peoples, as nations.
Oh, that's absolutely great. The first question I would like to ask you is a very general one. What is climate change for you and for the community of people you represent?
Climate change for us is a reckoning. It is the human species taking ownership of what it has done in terms of the way of life that it has propagated around the world. This means that we must fully recognize our what we call modern cultural mythology, in that we see as supreme gods or truths the efficacy or the substance of science, or rationalism, the Enlightenment, and technological supremacy. We have created a life of comfort for the human species to the detriment of our older relatives, according to our worldview. You know, the human species, the two-legged species, is the youngest sibling of what we call Wamakashka, the beings that move about the earth in a sacred manner, of which the human species is just but one member of that family. So climate change, climate justice for us means that we must return to a worldview in which we use our science, we use our technology to create harmony with the environment which birthed us and which provides for our sustenance. It is incumbent upon the human being to recognize that there is a relationship here, and that we must use the best of our abilities to change our course. You know, we have a very large carbon footprint. We are poisoning the waters of the earth. We don't have any respect for the sacred sites and the sacred metaphysical realities that are available to us as human species. And this is all over the world. So for us, this is part of our journey, part of our prophecy. One of our great leaders expounded a prophecy. His name is Chief Frank Foolscrow. And he said that if the world would only put land back in indigenous hands, the world could begin to heal. So I will say that climate justice is very serious for us. Our children are acutely aware of the crisis that they have inherited, but it is not too late. It is never too late to take courage and to stand up to those extractive corporate financial conglomerates that have brought the fight to my front door. Speaking of Standing Rock, it is never too late to recognize that we have natural rights, we have birthrights, as well as treaty rights and constitutional rights and human rights. And we must be willing to defend those rights against any and all odds. So we find ourselves in this dynamic, in this dialectic, and that is what climate change and climate justice means to us.
Could you tell us now, please, what happened in your lands in the US, referring to oil developments in your native lands, and specifically to the Dakota Access Pipeline, I guess, development?
I had run for the United States government, the United States Congress. I had run for that office in a state called North Dakota, and I lost the election, but at the same time, Kelsey Warren, who is the CEO of a big oil company called Energy Transfer Partners, announced their intent to put energy infrastructure in our territory, in our homelands of the Sioux Nation, of the Lakota Nation, the Oceti-Sakowin. But the American Republic does not recognize our legal rights because of the doctrine of discovery, which was propounded, created by the scribes of not only Italy, but of Spain. And this was back in 1453 and 1493, you know, when Christopher Columbus landed on our shores. The Pope and the Vatican play extremely important roles in the lives of indigenous peoples. Because of these doctrines, Kelsey Warren and Donald Trump felt emboldened to treat us as if we have no rights, as if we are subhumans, as if they could build this pipeline and we would not stand up to them. So when a human being is backed into a corner and when they are threatened, when they are put in danger, they will defend themselves. So this is all we did. We took a ceremonial, prayerful, non-violent stance against those who continue to instigate violence against us. Kelsey Warren, Energy Transfer Partners, and private military contractors descended into our homelands and infiltrated the resistance camps, which posed a threat to their petrochemical world order. You know, these are the people that determine and dictate the energy policy of the United States and the foreign policy. And sometimes those are the same things. This is why we are in the Middle East, or why we are withdrawing, why there were terrorist attacks against the United States. It's because we are a bully, and the indigenous nations who signed treaties with the United States are telling United States leaders that we are still here, that our lands, our waters, and our sacred sites are inviolable, that we cannot live without their integrity and their sanctity, that we have adapted, we have evolved, and we now know the technologies of the English, its language, and its institutions, and that we are still trying to reach out with our hand in friendship and teach the people of the Western civilized world that we have much to offer, and that we want realities that this world order has imposed on humanity. So that at Standing Rock, 850 people were arrested. I was threatened with 6 years in prison. They charged me with inciting a riot simply because I took to social media and shared 2 live feeds inviting media, lawyers, legal observers, and others to come and stand with us to defend Mother Earth and to defend our sovereignty as indigenous nations. And it is very traumatic. People were maimed, people were brutalized, people's lives were recklessly endangered. And it was a precursor to what the world saw with the murder of George Floyd and the enhancement of the militarized police state. And we, those who love freedom, justice, and equality, cannot stop in that dynamic as well. We must always defend those rights which we hold to be sacred to us, which we hold to be dear to us.
What is Lakota People's Law Project, and what was the role of Lakota People's Law Project in this process?
Lakota People's Law Project is an organization that I joined in the year 2012 because they were fighting against the taking and placing of Native American children in violation of United States law in homes and institutions that are not supportive of the indigenous identity in the United States. Because of the practice of genocide and cultural erasure, you've seen the residential schools, the boarding schools. These are not schools, but they are church-run, state-sponsored concentration camps. And because of our ability to survive and to address the wrongs that have been done to us, I joined the Lakota People's Law Project. And in 2016, when my run for the United States Congress was finished, because I am a lawyer, because I am a scholar and a philosopher trained in the worldview, the ancient worldview of the Lakota people, I felt it incumbent that it was my responsibility to provide a spiritual and legal foundation to the reasons why we were there at the resistance camps fighting the big extractive industries. So I proceeded to communicate to the world, communicate to those on the ground, that we, the Oceti Sakowin, the Sioux Nation, have a prior right to this territory. We have a right to be where we are at, because we had not been allowed in there since 1889, when the United States said, you Indians, Indianos, we are going to confine you. And that's what these reservations started out as: prisoner of war camps, places of confinement. They are now our homelands, and we are still trying to create opportunity for ourselves and to join the family of nations in the world. So my organization, the Lakota People's Law Project, was expressing its stance and defending the sovereign rights and the inherent rights, the human rights, the natural rights, and the birth rights of everyone who was at Standing Rock. And they also once I was charged as a criminal, they charged me with criminal trespass, and it is legally impossible for me to trespass on my own land. They charged me with inciting a riot. I had to rely on Daniel Sheehan, Alexander Reichert, and Lanny Sinkin, and other attorneys to defend me. And it was because of the Lakota People's Law Project's willingness to defend me and to defend the sovereign rights of indigenous peoples that we were able to put up a stance. We were able to put up a front, and it has impacts of global proportions. What happened at Standing Rock is a ceremony. It was a ceremony that shifted the consciousness of all human beings around the world. Everybody who was able to see it, and everybody who is able to recognize it, that we are in a time of prophecy, that we put our bodies on the line. And in our worldview, this is a form of ceremony when you sacrifice your own safety, your own livelihood, your own body for the greater good, for something greater than ourselves, which is Mother Earth and the sacred sites. And we have, we are the world's last line of defense. Indigenous peoples and those allies, people who know that we are speaking the truth, represent something redemptive. They represent a redeemable aspect of our species in light of the path that we have taken in the world. So that's how I was involved, or how our organization was involved at Standing Rock, and we're still fighting to have our territorial integrity repaired or redressed. If Energy Transfer Partners is going to use the private military industrial complex of the United States to violate our rights, then they should also have to pay us transfer fees for crossing our country. But sometimes these legal arguments fall on deaf ears, and we have to take to the streets. We have to take to the capital cities. The United States, because it has lied to its citizens about the slavery and the genocide and the European American cultural supremacy, or the white supremacy that it has set up and protected in this country, everybody who doesn't identify with, white heteronormative patriarchy, we are in a state of political turmoil. We represent the oppressed of this country, and we are bubbling over. Every now and then, you're going to see this country burning like it did when George Floyd was killed, because we are not living up to those ideals that the founding fathers set forth for us. But we are still here trying to teach, trying to say that we should all graduate from the differences and some of the illnesses that we have been given, like racism, or like religious oppression, or gender differences and discrimination. We are still speaking that truth, and every so often you see it bubble over, because the powers that be are ignoring us, and we can't stay ignored forever. So, but we still stand in the power of our peace, and we want to make good relations with the world.
Of course, you are fighting a local battle which has global resonance, of course. And in a few days, world leaders will meet in Glasgow at COP26 to take action against climate change and to face the energy transition and to hopefully do something about it. Do you feel indigenous people rights and views are adequately represented in such a venue? And what do you ask for?
That is a good question. Indigenous nations, I'm in the place right now on the Pine Ridge Reservation, the Oglala Lakota Nation, where the United States instigated a civil war in the 1970s, which my mother and my father were heavily involved in. Our family had suffered bloodshed because the United States had given ammunition and arms and funding and legal protection to some of our people who then committed these brutalities and this violence on our own people. And after that time, indigenous leaders like Frank Foolscrow, like Matthew King, like Russell Means, like Virgil Killstraight, and Oren Lyons of the Haudenosaunee people all went to Geneva, Switzerland. And the what is now the G20, or the United Nations of the world, did not know how to engage a discourse with the nations that predated their establishment in places like the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. Everywhere there was colonialism, the United Nations says, wait a minute, we don't know how to deal with indigenous peoples. We are going to call them NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So indigenous peoples, our elders and our medicine people, are still fighting to be recognized as a nation state, as being able to show up at COP 2021 in our own auspices, under our own authority. But even if we don't have that, we will still be there to speak our truth to the world, to let the world know, along with my daughter, Tokata Iron Eyes, whose friend is Greta Thunberg. We were able to host Greta here in the Sioux Nation and in the United States just 2 years ago. They will let the world know that the private petrochemical industrial complex is leading us to the precipice of an extinction level event, to the precipice of a climate collapse, and that we still have the duty and the ability to take action to change the way our economies create value and move away from petrochemicals to hemp, to biofuels, to other plants, people of the plant nation who've always taken care of us. I'm reminded of one of our most prominent leaders. He is the 19th generation keeper of the sacred calf pipe, which is equivalent or akin to maybe the Holy Grail from the Western world. He is a keeper of our power, an instrument of our power, the power of our nation. And he says that it is no accident that we are born into this time. We are living in critical times, in times of prophecy, and that the powers of creation have placed us here for a reason, and we have to seek out that reason. We can no longer sit back and let corporate, fascist, petrochemical oppression tell we, the human beings, how we are going to live our lives. These are also human beings who can make these changes, but they must be forced into that path. We live in a world where a big oil company can poison an entire river, and they are only given a fine. No human being is put in prison because they destroyed an entire river. No corporate charter is revoked because they have violated all of our collective rights. But when indigenous nations and our allies stand up to defend the sacred waters and the sacred lands as we know them from violent forces, it's we who are placed in prison. It's me who is charged with a felony and has to have my peace disturbed, knowing that I might go to prison. So the international community is ready for the truth. They are ready to receive indigenous nations on a government to government level, even though at this time we are going to be expressing our will through NGO status, through non-governmental organizational status. But that does not mean that we should not be having relations with the Interparliamentary Union or the state of Italy or the state of Denmark or anywhere in the world that knows that we deserve the right to be who we are, and that we deserve the right to live without the oppression of colonial rule. And we need to make friends. We need to do this in a peaceful way, but sometimes that way means that we have to stand in front of those who would do violence to our children's future and to Mother Earth. There is a better way for us, and we have to find it.
Of course, one of the greatest threats we are facing right now as a global community is biodiversity loss, a biodiversity collapse. Is there a connection between biodiversity and environmental protection on one side and indigenous people rights on the other side? What are the main pillars of the sustainable management of natural resource in indigenous tradition and in indigenous lands?
Our people, the indigenous nations, have a cosmological responsibility to maintain and to protect the rights of non-human entities, such as the animals, but we don't call them animals, such as the plants. These are the children of creation that have sustained life here on our planet for millions of years, for billions of years. And indigenous nations, because our economies require that the water be clean and that the plants and the biology of the ecosystem is healthy. Every year we do ceremonies with Mother Earth. Every year we uphold our obligations to the sacred universe. So when the biodiversity is threatened, indigenous peoples feel it first because we are connected to the land, we depend on the land. And even though we are 5%, or we are a small population in the globe, we are sitting on 20% of the land on Mother Earth, on the globe, and 80% of the biodiversity lives in those lands where we now make our lives. So indigenous nations are connected to the survivability of the planet. I will say that our cosmology tells us that our blood, our flesh is formed of the flesh and blood of Mother Earth, and our bones are formed of the flesh of what is now called the rock, the rock of Mother Earth. That is a spirit in our worldview called Iya. And the human being, the more it silences the noise, can recognize that our every breath is a unitive experience, is a divine expression of our connection and our interdependence on Mother Earth, on the biodiversity, and to the incomprehensible, infinitely expanding universe as we know it. Human beings are part of this creation, and we have been misguided by Western civilization. All of us, we have all been misguided, but we are here now, and we have the ability to change our reality and reclaim our sacred metaphysics. This is what we are doing. This is the path that we are walking. And I am honored and privileged to share a little bit of our perspective.
And we were honored and privileged to have you here, and thank you for your words and your time. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Chase Iron Eyes. All the best to your projects and everything.
Let me say, Lila wopila tanka ichichaplo na tokata kya Italia ma coche wahinajipi. I look forward to the time that I could visit your lands again. I have a very good time and a privilege to visit, the cities and to spend time in Cervia and to know the land a little more. And I'm looking forward to creating relations with Italia and all the people there.
Let's hope we meet in person one day then.